Imagine, uh, imagine studying for 32 hours straight for this incredibly important exam.
No, it sounds painful.
Right. But then you sit down at the desk, you open the test, and you discover that studying that intensely actually, heck, physically broke your brain's ability to ever learn anything new again.
Wow. Yeah, that would be a nightmare.
It's totally wild. You haven't just memorized the textbook. You've altered your mind so rigidly that you can't even adapt to, I don't know, a slightly reworded question.
Yeah.
And the crazy thing is, in the world of artificial intelligence right now, that is exactly what is happening to some of the most advanced models on the planet.
It really is, yeah. It's this phenomenal paradox in machine learning. I mean, the prevailing assumption in the industry has always been, scaling up.
Right. More data, more compute.
Exactly. Scaling up the data and the training time invariably yields a more capable system. That's the gospel. But the reality of pushing a neural network from its initial training phases into its final reasoning phases, well, it reveals a structural fragility we are really only just beginning to understand.
Which brings us to today. Welcome to our deep dive. Today's mission is to unpack this fascinating state-of-the-art generative AI paper. It's got a somewhat intimidating title, When RL Fails After SFT, Rejuvenating Model Plasticity for Robust SFT-to-RL Handoff.
Catchy, I know.
Yeah, very academic. But we are going to rip right into the mechanics of this. To ground the conversation, though, for you listening, let's look at the standard playbook for training a large language model. It generally happens in distinct phases. I always think of it like teaching someone to ride a bike.
Oh, the bicycle analogy. Yeah, that actually tracks perfectly with the architecture of the pipeline.
Right. So phase one is bolting on the training wheels. You're teaching the absolute rigid basics, like how to sit where the pedals are, how to grip the handlebar.
Mechanics.
Exactly. In the AI pipeline, this is supervised fine-tuning, or SFT, you are feeding the model demonstrations of exactly how to format a response, how to parse a prompt, and basically just how to follow explicit instructions.
And then comes phase two. You rip those training wheels off, you give the bike a good shove, and you just let the rider figure out how to balance through trial and error.
Which is terrifying, but it works.
It does. And that is reinforcement learning, or RL. The model generates responses, it gets a reward score based on how good its reasoning is, and then it updates its approach.
And the entire industry relies on that exact handoff, right? The SFT-to-RL pipeline.
Absolutely. The standard operating procedure just assumes that a model that's been rigorously trained during the SFT phase, like one that has absolutely mastered those training wheels, that it'll serve as the optimal launchpad for the RL phase.
Because the SFT handles the formatting, and then the RL can just focus on optimizing the complex reasoning.
Right, that's the theory. But this paper we're looking at today just completely dismantles that assumption. The researchers demonstrate that if you leave those SFT training wheels on for too long, the AI actually loses its ability to learn during the RL phase.
It just stops learning.
Yeah, it suffers from what they call a measurable loss of plasticity. It becomes rigid.
Okay, I have to push back on the logic there because it kind of defies the conventional wisdom of scaling laws. I mean, the researchers compared a model pushed through a moderate amount of SFT, say, like 2 epochs, against a model heavily trained for 32 epochs, right?
Yes, 2 epochs versus 32.
And the heavily trained model performed significantly worse after reinforcement learning. How is that even possible? I mean, if I saturate a model with high-quality demonstration data for 32 epochs, shouldn't it have this, like, deeper well of knowledge to draw from?
You would think so.
So why does it suddenly become rigid and unteachable?
Well, to understand the rigidity, we have to separate human memorization from parameter optimization. They are not the same thing.
Okay, lay it on me.
When a person studies for 32 hours, like in your intro, they're ideally building conceptual frameworks. They're making connections.
Oh, synthesizing.
Exactly. But when a neural network undergoes 32 epochs of supervised fine-tuning, it is aggressively altering its internal mathematical structure to just perfectly minimize the loss against that specific training data. It's memorizing the exact path.
Oh, so it's overfitting the format.
Precisely. And the researchers discovered that this overtraining effectively damages the network's capacity to be reshaped later by the reward signals in RL.
Okay, wow. So the very act of perfecting the SFT data destroys the plasticity needed for the next step.
Yes.
If studying harder physically breaks the model's adaptability, the researchers must have had to open up the model's architecture to see what was actually misfiring in there.
They did, and it's fascinating. They diagnosed 2 massive structural symptoms in the over-SFT model.
The 32 epoch one.
Right. So the first symptom is found directly in the parameter space. By comparing that heavily overtrained 32-epoch model to the raw untrained base model, they observed massive sharp shifts in the parameters.
Sharp shifts in the parameters. Okay, if we visualize the lost landscape of the model's brain, what does that actually look like? I imagine a moderately trained model has a somewhat forgiving topology.
Yeah, a moderately trained SFT model sits in a relatively smooth, rolling mathematical basin. The parameter weights have moved, sure, but they haven't been driven to absolute extremes.
So like a gentle valley.
Exactly. And because the landscape is smooth, the subsequent reinforcement learning algorithms can easily roll those weights around to find better optima later.
There's room to move.
Right. The overtrained model, however, has essentially dug itself into a deep, jagged mathematical trench.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. A specific subset of its parameters has been pushed incredibly far from their initializations, creating this harsh landscape filled with sharp spikes.
Okay, so if the internal map is that jagged and extreme,
Yeah.
the model's actual output behavior must be completely distorted, right? Which I'm guessing brings us to the second symptom.
You guessed it. The second symptom manifests in the output space as entropy collapse.
Entropy collapse. That sounds ominous.
It is in terms of learning. In information theory, entropy measures diversity or uncertainty. So the researchers measured the token entropy, basically the diversity of the model's predicted next words.
Like how many different words it considers valid for the next step.
Exactly. In the moderately trained model, the entropy sat around 0.184.
Okay.
But in the overtrained model, it plummeted all the way down to 0.024.
Wait, really? That is a catastrophic drop.
It's a huge drop in probability math.
So instead of considering like 5 or 10 valid ways to construct the next step of a problem, the model is essentially assigning, 99.9% probability to a single exact token.
Exactly that. It becomes wildly overconfident. And because it's so certain, it leaves absolutely zero wiggle room for the reinforcement learning algorithms to explore alternate reasoning paths.
Because RL needs choices to reward.
Right. If there's only one path being considered, RL has nothing to work with. But the specificity of that overconfidence is actually the most revealing part of the diagnosis.
What do you mean?
Well, the model isn't becoming overconfident about, like, factual knowledge or complex mathematical formulas.
Oh, what is it obsessing over?
The entropy collapse specifically its logical connectives and formatting tokens.
Wait, so words like first or let or so?
Yeah, and even the token for a simple line break. The literal \n.
You've got to be kidding. It gets obsessed with line breaks.
It overlearns the structural format of the SFT demonstrations so aggressively that it becomes convinced there's only one mathematically acceptable way to transition between ideas.
It treats formatting constraints as absolute laws of physics.
Yes. Perfect way to put it.
Okay, it's like a musician who has practiced a complex piece of classical sheet music so rigidly, thousands of times over, that they become technically perfect at striking the keys. But they completely lose the neurological flexibility to improvise jazz.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Like if you ask them to jam, their brain simply defaults to the next note on the sheet music. They've optimized for perfect imitation at the expense of exploration.
The model is trapped by its own perfectionism.
Okay, so we have this AI acting like a rigid, overconfident classical musician entirely trapped at the bottom of a jagged mathematical trench. What actually happens when the developers force this stubborn architecture into the reinforcement learning phase? Do the RL algorithms just, aggressively try to pull it out of the trench?
They do, and it results in this fascinating optimization paradox. During the RL phase, the researchers measured the gradient norms being applied to the over-SFT model.
Gradient norms. Let me just clarify that for everyone, that's the mathematical signal from the reward model, right? Like the magnitude of the demand for the parameters to change based on the rewards it's receiving.
Exactly. It's the pressure to change.
So it's basically the RL algorithm screaming at the model that its current rigid path isn't yielding the highest score, so it needs to update its weights.
Yes, and the gradients they measured were exceptionally high. The RL algorithm is applying massive pressure to update.
Screaming really loudly.
Very loudly. But despite that massive signal, the actual weight update magnitude, meaning the physical movement of the parameters, was incredibly small.
Wait, it hears the screaming, but it physically cannot move.
It cannot move. The parameters are locked in those sharp spikes we talked about.
The trench.
Right. The RL optimizer is demanding movement, but the surrounding mathematical terrain is so steep and jagged that the algorithm cannot pull the weights out of the trench without destabilizing the network entirely.
Oh, wow.
Consequently, the overtrained model sees significantly lower performance gains during RL compared to the moderately trained SFT model.
I mean, the real-world stakes here are astronomical when you think about it. We're talking about massive AI labs spending tens of millions of dollars in compute power, screaming at a brick wall.
Millions of dollars.
The GPUs are running at maximum capacity, calculating massive gradient norms, but the model is making zero progress because its plasticity is gone. It's insane.
It creates an incredibly expensive bottleneck. And to avoid this, developers currently rely on an imprecise guessing game called early stopping.
Early stopping.
Yeah, they try to find a Goldilocks checkpoint, a moment during training where the model has learned enough SFT to be useful, but hasn't yet suffered that entropy collapse.
But how do they know when that is?
They don't. Finding that exact epoch requires saving dozens of model checkpoints and running highly expensive RL trials on all of them just to see which one miraculously takes off.
Which brings us to the actual breakthrough of this paper, thankfully. Instead of relying on early stopping or just throwing away a model that absorbed too much SFT data, the researchers engineered a post hoc two-step intervention to save it. They call the process rejuvenation.
Rejuvenation. It's a great name. And step one of rejuvenation is a global architectural fix called base-anchored model fusion.
Okay, I'm going to be highly skeptical of this step because the mechanism sounds deeply counterintuitive to me.
Let's hear it.
Base-anchored model fusion is essentially a mathematical interpolation between the stubbornly overtrained SFT model and the raw, completely untrained base model, right?
That's right.
Are we literally just averaging the parameter weights together? Like taking a highly tuned specialized model and watering it down with a naive base model?
Interpolation is the exact mechanism, yes. The researchers found that an alpha weight of 0.5 was optimal.
Half and half.
Half and half. By pulling the overtrained weights exactly halfway back toward the initializations of the untrained base model, it fundamentally alters the loss landscape.
But wait, doesn't that just destroy the SFT skills we just spent millions of dollars acquiring? It sounds like pulling a perfectly extracted, super strong shot of espresso and then, I don't know, dumping plain tap water into it.
I love that. The espresso analogy perfectly illustrates why this works, actually.
Right.
Yeah. Think about it. A 32-epoch SFT model is an over-extracted shot. It is intensely bitter and overpowering. It's so specialized that it's detrimental.
Okay, fair.
By interpolating with the base model, you are diluting that over-specialization. Mathematically, blending those weights halfway back physically shrinks the massive parameter spikes. It pulls the model out of the jagged trench and places it back into a smoother, rolling mathematical region.
Ah, so smoothing the landscape globally restores the gradient flow.
Exactly. It allows the reinforcement learning algorithms to finally gain traction and move the weights again.
Okay, but what about the espresso flavor?
Right. To address your concern about destroying the SFT skills, the magic of that 0.5 alpha is that the relative differences between the parameters remain intact enough to preserve the formatting and instruction following capabilities. You dilute the stubbornness without erasing the vocabulary.
That's brilliant. Okay, I see the utility in smoothing the landscape globally. But if we go back to the espresso, even if I water it down, the fundamental flavor profile of those specific beans is still there, right?
Sure.
Global fusion scales everything back equally, which means those deeply stubborn individual neurons causing the entropy collapse are still relatively dominant compared to the others.
Yes.
So we still have a model obsessed with starting every sentence with the word first.
Exactly, and that's why global fusion alone is insufficient to cure the targeted overconfidence. The logical connectives require a much more surgical intervention. Which leads us to step 2, targeted neuron reset.
Okay, a scalpel. But if we need a scalpel to find the specific neurons obsessed with formatting tokens, how do we even locate them? I mean, we're talking about a sea of billions of parameters.
It's needle in a haystack stuff. The researchers utilized a technique called direct logit attribution, or DLA.
Direct logit attribution, how does that work?
They look at the final output probability, the logit for a specific formatting token, and they basically trace the mathematical attribution backward through the network layers.
Like a diagnostic query.
Yes. They are asking which specific modules push the probability for this token to 99%.
And what do they find? Is it a diffuse problem across the whole brain?
No, actually, it isn't diffuse at all. The obsession is highly localized.
Really?
Yeah, they found the culprits were heavily concentrated in the later layers of the network, specifically within the kproj and vproj modules.
Okay, let's clarify those modules because they are critical for anyone familiar with transformers. The attention mechanism uses keys and values to route information and decide where to focus. So the kproj and vproj, those are basically the routing switchboard of the AI's brain.
The switchboard, exactly. And the DLA revealed that these specific switchboards had essentially hardwired themselves to trigger almost exclusively on formatting tokens, completely ignoring the broader reasoning context of the prompt.
Wow. Those specific kproj and vproj neurons are the rusty bolts, literally locking the SFT training wheels into place.
That's exactly what they are.
So what is the surgical reset? Do we just, delete those neurons?
Not delete. They isolate a remarkably tiny fraction of these highest contributing neurons, often as little as 1%, and in some models, just 2.5% of the network.
Wait, 0.5%.
Yeah, it's tiny. Then they revert that specific subset of neurons completely back to their exact raw values from the untrained base model.
Just that 1%.
Just that 1%. And by wiping out only the most rigid parameters, they systematically shatter the entropy collapse.
That's incredible.
It restores token diversity precisely where it was lost, allowing the model to consider a wide array of reasoning paths again, without damaging the vast majority of the SFT knowledge stored in the other 99% of the network.
The efficiency of that is staggering to me. I mean, from an engineering perspective, scanning billions of parameters with DLA and executing a surgical reset, that sounds like a massive computational lift.
You'd think so, but it's not. The paper notes this entire step takes just 3 minutes on a single H800 GPU.
3 minutes.
Yep.
It is literally an eternal sunshine of the spotless mind memory wipe, but strictly isolated to the model's bad habits. We keep the math skills, we keep the vocabulary, but we completely zap the 1% of the switchboard that makes it a stubborn know-it-all.
I love that analogy. It's a profound shift in how we manage model states. Instead of an expensive retraining loop, it is a highly targeted unlearning process designed purely to facilitate future learning.
So we have globally smoothed the mathematical landscape with base-anchored fusion,
Yeah.
and we have surgically zapped the stubborn kproj neurons.
The two-step rejuvenation.
Right. The theoretical architecture makes total sense, but the ultimate test is deployment. When the developers take this newly rejuvenated model and initiate reinforcement learning, does it actually balance the bike without the training wheels?
It does. The empirical benchmarks are incredibly compelling. And to prove the intervention wasn't just, a fluke on a specific architecture, they tested rejuvenation on 2 completely different domains.
Okay, what domains?
They applied it to evolm4b for complex mathematical reasoning tasks, and they applied it to quen38b for agentic tool use tasks.
Agentic tool use, like what?
Specifically scenarios where the AI acts as an interactive agent navigating a retail simulator environment.
Okay, so math logic and dynamic, multi-step decision-making.
Okay.
If it works on both of those, the mechanism is fundamentally sound.
Exactly. And in both environments, the rejuvenation process fully restored the model's RL trainability. On in-distribution task, meaning evaluations closely mirroring the original SFT data, the rejuvenated model matched the performance of the perfectly timed Goldilocks checkpoint.
Which, just to be clear, that alone is a massive win, because it completely eliminates the need to run dozens of expensive trials just to find that perfect early stopping epoch.
It saves so much time and money. But the true paradigm shift occurs in the out-of-distribution, or ODE benchmarks.
Oh, the generalization tests.
Right, the brutal ones. Benchmarks like GPQA, ARC, and MMLU. Tests that require the model to extrapolate reasoning far beyond its training demonstrations.
And how did it do?
The rejuvenated model didn't just match the perfectly timed SFT model on these tests. It significantly outperformed it.
Wow. I want to make sure the gravity of that ODE performance is super clear to everyone listening. By allowing the model to severely overtrain for 32 epochs, developers are essentially letting the model harvest an incredibly deep well of factual knowledge and structural discipline.
Yep.
And historically, the tax for that deep knowledge was a total loss of plasticity.
The rejuvenation protocol eliminates the tax. It allows developers to harvest the deep SFT knowledge, hit the rejuvenate button to systematically restore plasticity, and push the model into RL. It grants the architecture the absolute best of both worlds. Intense, task-specific mastery combined with unparalleled generalized reasoning.
This transforms the SFT-to-RL handoff from this, fragile, unpredictable dark art into a robust, deterministic pipeline. You just let it overtrain, reset the switchboards, and unlock peak performance.
It's elegant.
It really is. So let's pull all these threads together. The transition from supervised fine-tuning to reinforcement learning has historically been a perilous balancing act. Pushing a model too hard during the SFT phase fundamentally alters its internal architecture, creating deep, jagged parameter spikes and triggering a massive collapse in token entropy.
The trench and the narrow mine.
Exactly. The model becomes a rigid perfectionist, obsessing over logical connectives and formatting tokens to the point where it completely ignores the gradient signals of reinforcement learning. It's deaf to the screaming. But we now have a mechanical cure.
We do.
Through a synthesis of base-anchored model fusion to globally smooth the loss landscape, and a surgical targeted neuron reset via direct logic attribution to wipe out the 1% of stubborn attention modules, developers can forcibly restore an AI's open-mindedness.
The methodology proves that plasticity is not, a strictly finite resource that just burns away during SFT. It is a structural state that can be engineered and recovered.
For you, the listener, the implications of this are immediate. The foundation models you rely on daily for coding, drafting complex documents, or interacting with agentic tools, they are about to experience a massive leap in lateral thinking.
Absolutely.
Because developers now have the tools to cure algorithmic stubbornness, the AI you interact with will be vastly better at reasoning outside the box, rather than just safely regurgitating the exact structural constraints it was fed during early training.
And the granular control demonstrated in this paper introduces a fascinating horizon for model architecture down the line.
What are you thinking?
Well, if we can mathematically isolate the precise 1% of neurons responsible for ideological rigidity and entropy collapse, the next logical step is automation.
Like doing it on the fly.
Exactly. We could realistically design self-healing neural networks.
Oh, wow.
Imagine an AI model that runs continuous background DLA diagnostics while deployed in the real world. It constantly monitors its own token entropy, and the moment it detects itself becoming too narrow-minded or overconfident in a specific conversational domain, it autonomously resets its own targeted neurons in real time to preserve its creative adaptability.
A self-aware intelligence that continuously monitors its own bad habits, realizes it is getting too stubborn, and reaches into its own brain to unbolt the training wheel so it can stay agile.
Yep, self-tuning.
That is a wild, incredibly exciting future to contemplate. Well, that wraps us up for today. Until next time, keep diving deep.